think the most important thing is communication and trust.
Absolutely. Without that foundation, it's hard to build anything lasting. It's a different way to live, very different to what we are used to, but I think that we could do well here.
Life is meant for adventure, and this scooter is my passport to the unexplored. Every journey, a new story.
So that's the story of how I ended up with a pet squirrel in college. It was quite an adventure.
But you can see that the guys in the shop are happy. They're really happy, they're working with joy, and they are enjoying themselves, man.
So now you're talking about all the things.
I know, that's what I was just thinking.
So we can see the potential for growth in this area.
I agree, the market analysis looks promising, but what about the local regulations?
It's really peaceful out here, especially at sunset.
This is how we harvest the bamboo for our crafts.
I'm not a big believer in a lot of that, but I think that the one message I get from that is you can do it.
It is important to remember that every journey, no matter how long, begins with a single step.
The morning cracked open, not with peace, but with whispers. Whispers that slithered through the walls of the house like smoke from a fire no one wanted to admit was burning. She sat at the table, the daughter, her eyes sharp with suspicion, her voice trembling with the weight of questions too heavy for a young heart. She asked her father again, for the 100th time, about the strange woman who had come knocking, the woman who stood in their yard like a ghost, refusing to leave, claiming that he had a child outside these walls, a child that was not hers, not his wife's, but still his blood. The father's face darkened, his jaw tight as he repeated the denial, his words heavy and flat, like stones thrown into a well. He said, no, there was no such thing. He said she was mistaken, a confused woman chasing shadows, perhaps desperate, perhaps delusional. But the daughter did not let it rest. She pressed him harder, reminding him of the conversation she had overheard between him and the stranger, a conversation that sounded too much like confession. The father's voice rose, defensive, desperate, claiming she was wrong, that the woman had misremembered, that not every similarity of face or word meant blood. But truth has a way of gnawing at silence, and the daughter carried more than doubt. She carried proof. She told him of the paper she had seen, the one the woman had shown her, a paper with clinical letters and numbers that screamed louder than denials. A DNA test, it said, 99% certainty that the son of the stranger was also his. The daughter's hands shook as she recalled it, her words cutting through the air like knives. The father slammed his hand against the table, swearing the document was forged, a trick of con men who knew how to prey on innocence and greed. He spoke of fakes, of forgeries, of how easy it was these days to print lies on paper and dress them as truth. His voice grew sharp, commanding her to believe him, to trust the man who had raised her, who had never failed her, who now begged her to look away from the storm clawing at their door. But doubt is not so easily killed. It grows like mold in damp corners, silent but consuming. The daughter's eyes filled with stormlight, torn between the loyalty to the father she loved and the evidence that burned in her memory. She wanted to believe him, wanted to cling to the certainty of his words, but the paper's shadow lingered, and somewhere outside, the stranger's footsteps still echoed, a reminder that lies and truth often wear the same mask, and and that families, once cracked, may never fit together the same way again. The road stretched ahead of her like a question with no answer, winding through silence, dust rising under her feet as if the earth itself warned her to turn back. Yet she did not stop. The daughter carried her father's voice inside her like a shield, his denials echoing, his insistence that all of this was nothing but lies. Still, the image of the paper, the DNA test, burned in her mind, its numbers sharp as knives. She needed to see him, the boy grown into a man, the supposed son who stood at the center of this storm. Only then could she decide whether to believe or to tear the illusion apart forever. When she reached his house, it loomed small but stubborn, a structure weathered by years of struggle. The wooden boards groaned in the wind, the doorway sagged, and yet the place stood tall in defiance, as if refusing to collapse under the weight of its secrets. She raised her hand to knock, but before she could, the door opened. He stood there, the sun, his face framed by shadows, his eyes sharp with the kind of exhaustion that came not from lack of sleep, but from carrying too much pain for too many years. He looked at her not with surprise, but with expectation, as though he had known she would come, as though destiny itself had walked her to his doorstep. He stepped aside, wordless, and she entered. The air inside was heavy, smelling of old wood, of damp walls, of poverty that clung to every corner. They sat facing each other, and silence pressed down until finally he broke it. His voice was low, thick with bitterness, but steady. He spoke of a past she had never been told, a story buried by her father. He told her how his mother had once loved her father deeply, how they had shared a bond that seemed unbreakable until pregnancy shattered it. He said her father had walked away when the truth of the child emerged, leaving his mother to raise him alone, abandoned with nothing but empty promises. His words cut through the stillness like blades, each syllable a wound reopened. She shook her head, anger rising like fire in her chest. She told him he was mistaken, poisoned by lies his mother had fed him, desperate tales spun from bitterness. Her father, she said, was not that kind of man. He had raised her with strength, honesty, and devotion. He was not someone who abandoned responsibility. She clung to her loyalty, her denial fierce, as though the force of her words alone could erase his claims. But then he reached into his pocket and drew out the paper, folding it slowly, deliberately, before laying it on the table between them. The edges were worn, the creases deep, as though it had been unfolded and refolded countless times. Her eyes locked on the letters, the numbers, the undeniable conclusion printed there, 99%, the same certainty she had seen before. She touched it with trembling hands, her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment the world seemed to spin. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Fake, forged, lies written on paper. She seized them like lifelines and pushed the document back toward him. Her eyes blazed with accusation as she told him this was nothing more than a trick, a scam meant to pry open her family's door. He laughed then, but the sound was not warm. It was hollow, sharp, jagged. He told her the paper was real, that it was not obtained through deception but through truth, with the help of a friend in the medical field. He said he had grown up without a father, watching his mother break her back to feed him, watching her struggle with debts, her heart worn down by loneliness and betrayal. His words trembled, but his fury was clear. She rose to her feet, her fists clenched, and shouted that he was lying, that he was trying to exploit her family, to drag her father's name through the dirt for money. He stood too, his voice thundering through the small house, swearing that his pain was not a performance, that his life had been shaped by the absence of the man she called father. He told her about the debt, 20 million that had never been repaid, a chain that bound them even when her father pretended it did not exist. But to her ears, it sounded like greed, like one more reason to fabricate a story that threatened to rip her world apart. Their voices rose higher, colliding like storms, accusations and denials tangled in the air, until the walls themselves seemed to vibrate with the force of their rage. She thought of her childhood, the safety of her father's presence, the way he had carried her on his shoulders, the way he had protected her. That was the man she knew, the man she trusted, and she could not reconcile him with the villain painted in the son's story. He thought of his childhood, the silence at his table, the empty space where a father should have been, the nights he lay awake listening to his mother's muffled tears. That was the man he knew, the father absent, the father who had chosen another life. At last, trembling with fury, she snatched the paper from the table. He reached for it, shouting, but she pulled it away and with a scream ripped it apart. The sound of tearing split the air louder than thunder, a final denial made flesh. The pieces fluttered to the floor like dying leaves, and she stood over them, chest heaving, her eyes filled with fire. She told him never to come near her family again, never to drag them into his lies, never to claim a blood tie where none existed. Her words cracked with both rage and fear, because deep inside she knew the truth was more complicated than she dared admit. He stood frozen, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles whitened. His eyes glistened, not just with anger, but with something darker, the grief of rejection, the pain of being erased. For a long moment, neither of them moved, the silence after the storm heavier than the shouting had been. Finally, she turned and left, her steps echoing through the narrow street, each one carrying her farther from him, but not from the doubt that gnawed at her heart. He remained behind, staring at the fragments on the floor, each torn piece a reminder that truth, once destroyed, does not vanish. It lingers, like ash after fire, refusing to be forgotten. The door closed behind her with a force that shook the fragile frame of the house, and silence descended, thick and suffocating. The son stood in the middle of the room, his chest heaving, his hands still trembling from the storm of words that had just torn through the air. The pieces of the DNA test lay scattered across the floor like the remains of a body, murdered not by accident, but by choice. He stared at them, his jaw clenched so tight that pain shot through his temples, and in his eyes burned a fury that no denial could extinguish. For a moment he thought of chasing after her, of shouting his truth into her ears until she could not ignore it. But then the weight of exhaustion crushed him down, and he sank into the old wooden chair, the silence pressing harder than her accusations ever had. When he finally rose, his feet dragged toward home, the path winding beneath the dull light of afternoon. His mother waited, her frame bent but her eyes alert, searching his face the moment he stepped inside. She knew. A mother always knows. Her hands, rough from years of labor, reached for him, but he pulled away, pacing the room like a caged animal. His voice came harsh, trembling with anger, spilling out the story of how the daughter had called him a liar, a thief, a man desperate to steal what was not his. He told her how she had torn the paper, shredding not just proof, but every hope he had carried that someone, anyone from that family would acknowledge him. His mother's shoulders sagged, the weight of years pressing heavier, but her eyes glistened with sorrow rather than surprise. She had lived long enough to know how cruelty can wear many masks, how denial can wound deeper than hatred. She whispered that she was sorry, that perhaps she should never have pressed him to seek the truth, that her own longing had led him into a battle doomed from the start. But he shook his head violently, the fire in his chest roaring higher. He swore he would not crawl before them again, would not beg for what was his by right. He spat the words like venom. He no longer needed that man, no longer needed a father who had chosen silence over blood. Instead, he declared, he would stand on his own. He would take the debts, the burdens, the shadows of betrayal, and he would turn them into fuel. He promised his mother that he would earn enough to free her from the chains of 20 million, that he would carve a life out of the soil and the sweat of his own back. His voice cracked, but determination held it steady, a vow forged in anger and sealed in love. The next morning came not with peace, but with labor. The forest awaited, vast and merciless, its green canopy whispering of secrets and suffering. He rose before dawn, his body aching even before work began, and with his mother he trekked into the thickets where bamboo shoots pierced the soil like spears. The sun was merciless, its rays slicing through the leaves, burning his skin until sweat ran down in rivers. His hands bled from cuts, his back throbbed with strain, but still he bent and pulled, dug and carried, each motion a defiance against the voices that had called him worthless. The earth seemed to resist him, roots clinging stubbornly, but he tore at them with rage, with hunger, with the unyielding drive of a man who would no longer be dismissed. By midday, the baskets were heavy with mang, their weight pressing into his shoulders, biting at his flesh. His mother stumbled, coughing, but refused to stop, her pride refusing to bow. Together they hauled their load down the narrow paths, every step a battle, every breath a victory stolen from fatigue. The forest did not pity them. The branches clawed at their clothes, the insects stung, the mud clung to their shoes. Yet still they moved forward, two figures bent but unbroken, their determination etched into every line of their bodies. When they reached the market, the chaos swallowed them whole. Voices rose and fell like waves, bargaining, shouting, laughter cutting through the air. The smell of sweat, of earth, of food both fresh and rotting wrapped around them, and the son felt the sting of eyes upon him. Some looked with pity, some with disdain, others with curiosity. He stood tall, his back straight despite exhaustion, and laid down the baskets of mang with a pride that refused to yield. His mother called out prices, her voice trembling but firm, and slowly coins clinked into their hands. But for every sale, there was a whisper. For every coin, there was a glance that reminded him of the story that followed them, the rumor of a father who would not claim him, of a family that rejected him. He bit down on his fury, forcing it into silence for now. Each coin became more than money. It became proof that he could endure, that he could provide, that he could fight without bending. That night, as they counted the small pile of earnings, his mother's eyes softened with pride, though her hands trembled with fatigue. He looked at her, at the lines etched into her face, at the strength carved from years of sacrifice, and he swore again, louder this time, that he would change their fate. No more begging, no more chasing shadows of a father who lived in denial. He would build a life with his own hands, even if they bled, even if his back broke. The wind rattled the shutters of their house, carrying with it the echoes of the daughter's voice, the accusations, the final sound of paper tearing. He let it come, let it fuel him. For in that sound he no longer heard loss. He heard the spark of rebellion, the start of a fire that no denial could smother. The night stretched long, but his resolve burned brighter than the darkness, and though his hands were blistered, his soul had hardened. He would not stop. He would not be silenced. The world could turn its back on him, but he would carve his name into it, one basket of mang at a time, until even those who had denied him would be forced to face the man they had tried to erase.